Hi there, I'm B. I'm a writer and a dreamer. I have fun making these videos, and it would be great if you can show your support by liking our videos, commenting, and subscribing to our channel. Thank you.
The Galactic High Council prided itself on one thing above all else: ceremony. It wasn't just that they were ancient or that they governed more star systems than any mathematician cared to count. No, the real crown jewel of their authority was the way they performed order. Every robe was starched, every proclamation etched in crystal, every vote accompanied by choral resonance from three species bred solely to sing legislative approvals in perfect harmony. For millennia, this had been enough. Nobody had ever asked why the laws were written on decorative scrolls in unreadable calligraphy, or why every treaty began with 14 pages of titles and 0 pages of actual content. The universe respected the council's dignity, and the council respected the universe's obedience. Then humans arrived. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Humanity had barely crawled out of their atmosphere when a scouting frigate belonging to the Zarketh Dominion stumbled upon them. By the standards of galactic civilization, humans were infants, carbon-based amateurs fiddling with combustion engines and digital assistants. The council expected them to enter quietly, nod politely, and accept whatever terms were handed down. Instead, the humans walked into the council chamber like someone had invited them to a badly lit corporate merger. They didn't bow. They didn't kneel. They didn't even bring the traditional offering of unconditional subservience basket filled with planetary minerals. They brought lawyers. 3 of them, to be precise, each one armed with stacks of paper. Real paper. Aliens who had never seen cellulose outside a biology lab stared at the bundles like someone had walked in carrying slabs of dried skin. The lead lawyer, a woman named Rivera, dropped her stack on the ceremonial table with a thud so loud it shattered 2 crystal goblets. She smiled. "We'll need to review your charter before signing anything." The chamber went silent. No species had ever requested to review the charter. The very idea was absurd. The Galactic Code of Conduct was regarded as holy writ, delivered in song by the first starfarers. Asking to review it was like asking to critique gravity. The council speaker, a 12-limbed elder of the Vayer species, leaned forward with a hiss. "The code is perfect, eternal. It requires no review." Rivera clicked her pen. "Uh-huh, just humor me." The council, in its infinite arrogance, humored her. They handed over a ceremonial scroll, glowing with the stored resonance of 1,000 recitations. Rivera squinted, turned it upside down, and frowned. "This is unreadable. Where's the section index?" "The what?" "The index. Table of contents. Subsections. Footnotes. Cross-references. Case law citations. You know how legal documents work." The speaker tilted its head, uncertain if this was a translation error. "The code is chanted. It requires no scribbles." That was when the rest of the humans, watching from the gallery, started laughing. Not polite laughter either. Gut-punching, wheezing laughter. They had just realized that galactic law, the system binding thousands of civilizations, wasn't a law book at all. It was a hymn, a performance piece, an ongoing group project that nobody had ever dared question because it sounded too majestic. And humans, in their infinite talent for disrespect, tore into it. Rivera and her team began asking questions the council couldn't answer. What constitutes unlawful aggression? Where's the definition of territorial waters in 3-dimensional space? How do you handle conflicting claims of mineral rights across parsecs? The council's representatives stammered through elaborate metaphors about stars birthing planets and destiny weaving rivers of light. The lawyers stared, pens hovering over their pads, waiting for an actual clause. None came. The gallery of aliens, delegates from dozens of species, shifted uneasily. For the first time, someone was pulling at the seams of the High Council's authority. And those seams unraveled fast. A delegate from the Kithral Empire timidly raised a hand. "Actually, yes, I've always wondered about the mineral rights thing." Another voice from the back. "And what about extradition treaties? The Drava Collective keeps stealing our diplomats." Suddenly, the chamber was alive with questions every species realizing they had been operating on vibes and good faith for millennia. The council speaker slammed his 12 fists down. Order. The code is clear. Rivera leaned in, pen tapping. Clear as mud. That line would later become famous, etched on coffee mugs, posters, even a monument in the council plaza. For now, it was just gasoline on the fire. The council tried to reassert control by invoking a ritual chorus of legal affirmation. 3 species of songbirds began harmonizing the opening verse of the code. Their crystalline tones filled the chamber, reminding everyone of tradition. Aliens sighed with relief, lulled by the familiar ritual, until a human pulled out a smartphone, hit record, and auto-translated the lyrics. The translation projected across the chamber wall. Law is law because we said so. Law is law because we sing. If you ask for proof or reason, we will simply chant again. The chamber erupted. Some species gasped in horror. Others laughed nervously. A few openly jeered. And humanity? Humanity sat back with the smirk of a species that had just discovered the galactic equivalent of a tax loophole the size of Jupiter. From that moment, the council could not unring the bell. Every meeting turned into chaos. Delegates asked for definitions. They wanted amendments. They demanded transparency. The council tried to wave it away, insisting everything was spiritually binding. Rivera shredded them alive. Spiritual binding? Great. Does that hold up in arbitration? Because if not, we'll need to draft actual contracts. The arrogance of the council cracked further when another human, this one a junior staffer named Malik, raised his hand and asked, "So where's the appeals process?" The speaker blinked. Appeals? You know, what happens if someone thinks the law was applied unfairly? There's always an appeals process. The silence that followed was legendary. An empire-spanning legal system governing trillions had never once considered the possibility of appeal. Decisions were decisions. Forever. The entire concept of judicial oversight was alien. And within minutes, species that had lost wars, land, and sovereignty under council rulings were demanding their cases be reopened. The humans didn't even have to push. They just asked questions. It was like showing up to a grand cathedral, marveling at the stained glass, and then pointing out the entire foundation was made of cardboard. The more the humans poked, the more the entire structure buckled. The council, desperate, tried to invoke their final authority, the ritual of eternal consensus, a booming choir joined by light shows across the chamber ceiling. It was meant to overwhelm dissent with spectacle. Rivera yawned. "I've seen better light shows in Vegas," she said. By the end of the first day, the myth of the council's perfect law was broken. Delegates were whispering about reforms. Some demanded codification. Others wanted humans expelled before they caused more damage. But it was too late. Humans had already sown doubt. The galaxy had glimpsed the possibility that the council wasn't infallible, just theatrical. And the cruelest irony? The humans weren't even trying that hard. They weren't revolutionaries. They weren't plotting galactic upheaval. They were just being themselves, annoying, pedantic, allergic to ceremony, obsessed with paperwork, and devastatingly good at finding where the fine print should be, but wasn't. The council had survived wars, plagues, and cosmic anomalies, but would not survive humanity's greatest weapon. The question, where's the documentation? By the time the humans left that first session, the chamber was still in uproar. Delegates argued, clerics wept, judges sulked in corners. Rivera packed her papers back into a leather bag, smiled at her team, and muttered under her breath, "They have no idea what's coming." The galaxy thought humanity would bring chaos with warships, nukes, or AI. They were wrong. Humanity's real doomsday device was bureaucracy, and they had just detonated it in the most sacred hall of power. The thing about footnotes is that no one respects them until it's too late. Every civilization in the galaxy had a word for fine print, and in every language it translated to the same thing: not worth reading. Contracts, treaties, sacred oaths. Aliens skimmed the grand introductions, maybe the flowery conclusions, but the tiny inconvenient little squiggles at the bottom, those were universally ignored. Which is why humanity, professional fine print predators, saw their opening. It started innocently. The council, flustered by the chaos from a human's first session, decided to modernize the code. They hired a committee of scribes to finally put the galaxy's holy chants into written form. It was a desperate move meant to appease all the species suddenly demanding clarity. And in their desperation, they let the humans help. Big mistake. Rivera, Malik, and the intern, always the intern, were invited to assist in formatting. The council thought this was safe enough. After all, formatting is grunt work. What could humans possibly break by fiddling with margins and citations? Cue the intern. Her name was Alia. Barely 22 years old, she joined the delegation straight out of law school, thrilled to be cataloging interstellar precedent. She spent 3 days transcribing pompous verse into clean subsections. She numbered clauses. She added headers. She even color-coded the definition section. The aliens adored her. Such order, such clarity. At last, we see the beauty of our eternal laws. Then, buried halfway down section 4b3, Alia slipped in a single line. Exceptions may apply in cases of human improvisation, caffeine dependency, or sheer bloody-mindedness. To her, it was a joke, a throwaway gag for Rivera to notice and chuckle at before deleting. But Rivera didn't delete it. She grinned, leaned back in her chair, and said, "Leave it." Nobody caught it. The council clerks didn't read the draft. The scribes assumed every line was holy. Delegates skimmed the glowing preface and signed without hesitation. And just like that, the galaxy's most sacred legal code acquired the most dangerous loophole in history. Humanity's right to do whatever they wanted, as long as they could justify it with bloody-mindedness. The real fun started when people began citing it. The first test case came 3 days later. A human freighter accidentally parked in a restricted orbital lane above the capital world of the Vayer species. Fines for this kind of thing were catastrophic. Millions of credits, confiscation of ships, lifetime bans. The freighter captain, a scruffy spacer named Kowalski, shrugged, tapped the code into his console, and quoted section 4b3. His defense: "My NAV computer was on the fritz, I was on my 5th cup of coffee, and honestly, I was just too damn stubborn to turn back." The Vayer judges sputtered. This wasn't a defense, it was an excuse. But then the human lawyer in attendance calmly pointed to the line. Exceptions apply. Improvisation, caffeine dependency, bloody-mindedness. The judges, horrified, realized the clause was real. They threw out the case. Kowalski not only kept his ship, but received an apology for undue stress. That ruling spread faster than light. Within a week, humans were walking out of contracts, ignoring tariffs, and laughing in the faces of customs officers. "Sorry, section 4b3, they'd say with a smirk, as if that phrase were a galactic get-out-of-jail-free card. And legally it was. The clause was ironclad, part of the sign code. Any attempt to override it just looped back into more paperwork. And who had written the paperwork? Humans. Entire empires buckled under the pressure. The Drava Collective tried to enforce a blockade against Earth shipping lanes. Humans cited sheer bloody-mindedness to run the blockade, arguing that stubborn persistence was literally a protected legal right. When the Drava brought this to the High Council, the humans won again, because the addendum Alia had tucked into the definitions section clearly defined bloody-mindedness as unreasonable perseverance in pursuit of a goal. The definition had footnotes, cross-references, even case law examples pre-written by Rivera. It was bulletproof. The Creole Dominion collapsed next. For centuries, they'd run a scam where they sold mineral rights twice to 2 different species, letting them fight it out while the Dominion pocketed fees. Humans cited improvisation to walk into disputed zones, claim both sides were invalid, and walk out with the minerals. When the Dominion protested, the Council was forced to rule in humanity's favor, because the code now recognized improvisation as a legitimate legal justification. The galaxy lost its collective mind. Delegates screamed about corruption. Armadas threatened war. Yet whenever anyone demanded repeal, the humans smirked, flipped to section 4b3, 3, and pointed to the procedural clause Alia had hidden at the bottom of the page. Amendments to this section must first be reviewed by a human interpreter. Interpreter in practice meant the intern. So yes, entire galactic empires now had to line up outside Alia's office if they wanted to change the code. And she never said no. She just made them wait 6 months, requested clarification memos, and then cited coffee break extensions. By the time she approved anything, the galaxy had moved on. Other civilizations began losing court cases they thought were unlosable. A mining conglomerate from the Zertak species sued a human for trespass. He argued that he'd been improvising a shortcut and refused to stop. He won. A fleet admiral from the Azeroth Republic tried to declare war on a human colony. The humans cited bloody-mindedness as grounds for resistance. The council ruled in favor of humanity, reclassifying the battle as spirited negotiation. The very language of law twisted around the clause. Words like illegal, binding, and punishment lost their teeth whenever humans were involved. Judges began to groan whenever they saw a human enter the courtroom, knowing full well they'd walk out victorious with a sarcastic shrug. The galaxy scholars tried to analyze how this had happened. They pored over human history. What they found horrified them. Humans have been weaponizing fine print for millennia. End-user license agreements, colonial charters, constitutional amendments, tax loopholes. The species have been bred in the fires of bureaucracy. To them, footnotes weren't irrelevant scribbles. They were where the real power lived. And now that power had infected the galaxy. By the end of the year, 3 interstellar wars had ended prematurely. Dozens of trade monopolies collapsed, and entire legal traditions were in flames. The Council's proud legal system, the eternal, untouchable code, was reduced to a joke passed around spaceports. Aliens whispered the phrase with dread. Exceptions may apply. Meanwhile, humans leaned back, sipped their coffee, and chuckled. Because deep down, they knew the truth. Warships and armies might win battles, but bureaucracy? Bureaucracy wins galaxies. The trial of the millennium wasn't supposed to happen. At least, not in the sense that anyone thought it would be an actual trial. The Galactic High Council didn't do trials. Their system wasn't designed for debate or examination of evidence. It was designed for ceremony. Someone would chant, someone else would nod, a choir would hum, and then the judgment would be declared. It had been that way since the dawn of interstellar bureaucracy. But the humans had broken the system with their beloved Section 4B3, and now every species in the galaxy wanted blood. The Council needed a scapegoat. Humanity, conveniently smug and caffeinated, was the obvious target. So they convened the Tribunal of Eternal Balance, a name so pompous it practically collapsed under its own weight. The council chamber was redesigned for the occasion. Obsidian pillars, holographic projections of scales, entire choirs of resonant singers ready to blast justice into the ears of anyone within 100 light years. Delegates filled the gallery. Thousands of species gathered to see humanity crushed under the weight of galactic law. The humans showed up late. They wandered in 20 minutes after the opening ceremony, carrying takeout boxes and disposable cups of something that smelled aggressively caffeinated. Rivera, the lead lawyer, plopped her food container right on the sacred marble dais. The council speaker nearly choked on his own indignation. You dare defile the sacred bench? Rivera took a bite. Relax. It's biodegradable. The chamber erupted in scandalized shrieks. Somewhere in the rafters, a judge fainted. Humanity hadn't even argued their case yet, and the council was already losing control. The charge was simple, or rather, it was delivered in a 57-verse hymn but boiled down to humans inserted an illegal clause into the code. The punishment? Expulsion from the council, invalidation of all their treaties, and a possible interstellar embargo. Basically, the galaxy wanted humanity back in the Stone Age. The prosecution began with a flourish. A 12-eyed advocate from the Veyor stood, robes shimmering, voice booming. He sang, literally sang, about the sanctity of the code, how it had been preserved for millennia, and how humanity's footnote of chaos threatened the stability of the cosmos. He gestured dramatically at glowing scrolls, waved to the choir, and even conjured holograms of galaxies spinning in balance. The audience applauded. Then Rivera stood. "Cool presentation," she said, tapping her stylus against her tablet. "Quick question, though. If the code was perfect, why did you let us edit it?" The prosecutor sputtered. Because tradition demanded." "Uh-huh. And did you actually read what we submitted?" "Of course we." Rivera raised an eyebrow. "Really? Then why are you only noticing Section 4B3 now?" Silence. Somewhere in the gallery, an alien delegate stifled a laugh. Rivera smelled blood in the water. She walked up to the holographic scales, waved her stylus, and pulled up the code itself. "Your Honor, if I may direct your attention to Section 4B3, Subsection 4, Addendum Beta." The speaker frowned. "What Addendum Beta?" Rivera smiled. "The one that specifies all code disputes must be displayed in a format accessible to all species." Before anyone could stop her, she tapped her tablet. The courtroom's grand projection system flickered, glitched, and then, oh gods, rebooted into a human PowerPoint. And the font was Comic Sans. The council chamber gasped. Delegates recoiled like they'd been punched in the soul. The galaxy's most sacred laws were now projected in a font usually reserved for children's birthday invitations and passive-aggressive office memos. Rivera didn't miss a beat. She flipped slides like a TED speaker. As you can see here, subsection 4 clearly states exceptions for human behavior. And yes, I know it looks ridiculous, but your rules require accessibility, and Comic Sans has the highest readability rating across species. Dyslexic-friendly, even. The judges tried to object, but their microphones crackled. The hollow projector, running on human-made firmware, crashed under the weight of the council's bloated legal files. It rebooted again, this time replacing the scales of justice with a low-resolution stock photo of a gavel. Across the bottom, a bright blue banner blinked. Trial powered by Windows 95 compatibility mode. The gallery howled with laughter. The council howled with rage. And the humans just sat there sipping coffee, nodding like smug interns watching an IT meltdown they predicted hours ago. The prosecution tried to recover. They called witnesses, clerks, scribes, even the resident singers. All testified that the footnote was never meant to exist. Each time, Rivera countered with brutal simplicity. "Then why did you sign it?" The answer was always the same. "We didn't read it." The humans had the galaxy's greatest powers on record admitting they signed a contract without reading the fine print. Judges tried to suppress the statements, but Rivera had already uploaded transcripts to the council's public archive. Within hours, species across the galaxy were streaming the footage, laughing at the incompetence of their so-called rulers. By day 3 of the trial, the council was a circus. Protesters filled the plazas outside. Alien lawyers began citing Section 4B3 for their own cases. Courtrooms across the galaxy collapsed into chaos as defendants claimed caffeine dependency and walked free. A Zyrtec warlord accused of genocide stood in court and argued he was bloody-minded. The judge, trembling, had to adjourn the case for fear of precedent. The council scrambled. They tried to lock down the code. They tried to ban human fonts. They even tried to outlaw footnotes entirely. But every emergency decree triggered another hidden clause. Refer to Appendix. See Addendum. Check subsection Z. Each one led back to documents formatted, annotated, and, worst of all, signed by humans. By the final day of the trial, the council's authority was already in tatters. The judges delivered their verdict with grim ceremony. Guilty. Humanity was guilty of destabilizing galactic law. But before they could announce the sentence, Rivera raised her stylus one last time. Objection. The chamber froze. Rivera projected the final addendum. Section 4B3, Footnote 12. In the event of a guilty verdict against humanity, sentencing shall be postponed until such time as humans have had their morning coffee. The gallery erupted. Judges screamed. Delegates fainted. And the humans? They packed up their bags, smiled, and said, "See you tomorrow morning." They never came back. From that day forward, the galaxy's highest court was haunted by the phrase that destroyed its credibility. Sentencing postponed, pending coffee. The trial of the millennium was over, and humanity hadn't just won. They had turned the entire galactic legal system into a punchline. The repeal hearings were supposed to be simple. The council had been humiliated by the trial of the millennium, their authority shredded, their laws projected in Comic Sans. But the solution, they thought, was obvious. Repeal the damn clause. Strike out Section 4(b)(3) and pretend the whole thing had been an embarrassing clerical error. Easy. Clean. Done. Except nothing in galactic politics is ever clean once humans are involved. The first repeal session opened with the kind of pomp only the galaxy could muster. Endless choirs, glowing banners, speeches about restoring order to the cosmos. Delegates raised their voices in unity, vowing to excise the human footnote of madness from the code once and for all. The speaker himself declared, with all 12 fists raised, that no single species should be allowed to corrupt the eternal law. And then Rivera stood up. "No problem," she said. "Go ahead. Repeal it. Just remember subsection Z17. The speaker froze. "What? Subsection Z17? Rivera pulled up a projection, mercifully not Comic Sans this time, but Arial Black, which was arguably worse. There, glowing in the language of the code, was a clause buried deep in the appendices. All repeal motions must first undergo review by a certified human interpreter. The chamber groaned. They'd forgotten about the addendum. And since the only certified interpreter in the galaxy was Alia, the intern, the repeal hearings immediately collapsed into bureaucratic deadlock. Delegates swarmed Alia's office with petitions, bribes, even threats. She accepted their forms with a polite smile and dropped them into a growing pile on her desk. Processing time, 6 to 8 months. Possibly longer if she was on holiday. The galaxy's finest empires, titans of industry and war, were now reduced to waiting in line like customers at a DMV run by a sleepy student. But it got worse. When the Kithral Empire tried to bypass the process and vote the repeal through anyway, Rivera casually cited Appendix B. 42. Votes cast without human oversight are invalid and must be treated as spirited debate, not binding law. The Council's sacred vote was legally downgraded to a conversation. The Kithral delegation stormed out, declaring war in the hallway. That war lasted all of 20 minutes before both sides realized Section 4(b)(3 technically reclassified warfare as aggressive networking. The battle was invalidated, the fleets grounded, and the commanders sent home with a strongly worded warning about unauthorized team-building exercises. The galaxy watched in disbelief. Empires that had once waged wars over minor insults now found themselves unable to lift a claw without a human lawyer pointing to some forgotten appendix. The proud Drava collective tried to seize a moon, only to be told by a human clerk that moons were legally classified as shared communal assets. The Azeroth Republic attempted a mass deportation, but the clause redefined deportation as forced tourism and required they provide each deportee with complimentary refreshments. Entire civilizations were paralyzed, stuck in a legal straitjacket woven out of human sarcasm. The Council panicked. They called emergency summits, each more disastrous than the last. At one point, they attempted to physically tear the clause out of the code, literally deleting the holographic lines from the archive. But the system, updated with human firmware, refused. A bright blue error message flashed across the chamber. Unauthorized edit detected. Please contact your human administrator. Delegates howled. The galaxy's holy law now came with IT support tickets. Meanwhile, the humans leaned back and enjoyed the show. Court cases collapsed daily. Armadas sat idle. Trade laws unraveled. And every time the Council tried to tighten control, another hidden clause detonated under them. Alia, the intern, had gone absolutely wild in the appendices. Subsection Q. 9 reclassified tariffs as optional tips. Addendum Delta. 3 granted humans priority boarding rights at all starports. Appendix Y required that all official council documents be proofread by at least one human with a caffeine level above 200 milligrams. It wasn't just law anymore. It was chaos, codified. Species that once revered the Council's wisdom began openly mocking them. Memes spread across the stars. Pictures of the speaker holding a cup of coffee, captions reading "waiting for sentencing." Starports sold bootleg t-shirts that said exceptions may apply. Even school children sang playground songs about bloody-minded humans. The High Council, once untouchable, had become a galactic punchline. Desperate, the Council tried the nuclear option, abolish the entire code, and start fresh. But when they attempted to dissolve it, Rivera calmly pointed to the dissolution clause. If the code is ever abolished, the default system of governance shall revert to the legal traditions of the species who drafted the last amendment. That species, of course, was humanity. The chamber nearly imploded. Thousands of alien civilizations realized in one horrifying instant that if they abolished the code, they'd all be subject to Earth's legal traditions, which meant trial by jury, discovery processes, depositions. Aliens imagined 12 random humans deciding the fate of galactic empires between bites of pizza. The threat alone kept them from voting. The collapse of authority spread like a virus. Local courts refused to enforce rulings. Military commanders balked at orders, citing legal ambiguity. Ordinary citizens began invoking Section 4B3 in daily life. A Zertak child used it to get out of homework. A Drava worker invoked it to skip an entire year of mandatory labor service. Whole planetary economies ground to a halt because everyone, everywhere, had learned the magic phrase, "Exceptions may apply." By the end of the year, the Council was a hollow shell. Once feared judges now shuffled into chambers with hollow eyes, knowing every ruling would be overturned by some smug human citing a footnote. Armadas that had once spanned galaxies sat idle, afraid to fire a shot. The very fabric of order had come undone, and through it all, the humans just grinned. They didn't need warships or fleets or superweapons. They'd done what no species in the galaxy thought possible. They'd conquered with paperwork. The galaxy had expected humanity to fight with guns. Instead, they rewrote reality with asterisks. And the cruelest twist? The Council couldn't stop it, because every attempt to repeal the clause only made it stronger. The galaxy had finally learned humanity's ultimate secret. You can ignore a footnote until it eats your civilization alive. By the time Part 5 of this cosmic comedy began, the galaxy was on its knees, not because of war, not because of plague, not because of some terrifying weapon of mass destruction. No. The mighty civilizations that had ruled for millennia were paralyzed by a single line of text, a legal hiccup no one had thought worth reading. The High Council had once projected power through fear, order, and pageantry. Now they projected confusion, error messages, and endless human smirks. They had tried everything. Emergency summits, repeal motions, even ceremonial exorcisms of the cursed footnote. Nothing worked. The code was riddled with human addenda, like termites chewing through marble. Every clause they touched crumbled into absurdity. The galaxy faced a choice: collapse entirely or adapt. They chose the latter, begrudgingly, painfully, hilariously. It began with the smaller empires. Unable to function under the weight of contradictions, they started hiring humans as footnote consultants. These weren't warriors or diplomats. They were interns, paralegals, and exhausted graduate students armed with highlighters and too much coffee. The Creole Dominion, once a proud slaver empire, found itself groveling before a 24-year-old named Sandra from Cleveland, who explained that according to Section 4B3, their entire economic model was now classified as exploitative networking, and thus required employee benefits. By the end of the week, the Dominion was drafting galactic HR policies. Word spread. Soon, entire star systems refused to ratify contracts unless a human had stamped them with a sacred approval. Reviewed, annotated, exceptions applied. Colonies began advertising themselves as human-certified legal zones. Trade networks collapsed unless overseen by Earth consultants. The galaxy's proudest civilizations realized, to their horror, that they could not function without humanity's paperwork addiction. The High Council tried to resist. They held one final session, robes starched, choirs primed, determined to prove they could govern without humans. Delegates raised motions, passed votes, and issued proclamations. It was glorious until someone asked which section of the code their motion referenced. Silence. Nobody knew. Someone tried to bluff, citing Section 9A, only to discover that Section 9A had been redefined as snack breaks and refreshments thanks to an intern's midnight editing spree. The entire chamber adjourned for snacks. That was the moment the council realized they were finished. From then on, humanity was no longer just a species. They were an institution. They didn't conquer worlds. They footnoted them into compliance. Armadas stood idle not because of peace treaties, but because the weapons requisition forms hadn't been signed by a human interpreter. Taxes went unpaid until a human clarified whether tribute qualified as mandatory donations. Even wars could not legally begin without at least one Earth lawyer present to define terms like combatant and surrender. Alien emperors who once commanded fleets with a gesture now waited for interns to approve their memos. Whole civilizations began competing to hire human clause masters, offering obscene salaries, luxury housing, even entire moons as perks. The best and brightest humans didn't become astronauts or scientists. They became interstellar attorneys. Harvard Law was now considered a galactic superpower. And then came the final humiliation, the rewriting of the code itself. The galaxy convened on Earth, yes, Earth, for the drafting of a new constitution. Aliens expected something ceremonial, a return to grandeur. Instead, they got a human conference center in New Jersey, fluorescent lighting, and endless coffee refills. Rivera presided over the process in a blazer and sneakers, armed with a red pen that struck terror into galactic monarchs. Alia, now promoted from intern to chief annotator of the known universe, cheerfully passed out binders color-coded by subsection. The new document was titled, in bold Helvetica, The Universal Code of Law, as annotated by humans who actually read it. Delegates wept. The preamble, once a hymn to the stars, was now a single sentence. Don't be an idiot, and if you are, exceptions may apply. The galaxy was outraged until they realized it worked. Suddenly, trade flowed again. Courts functioned. Armadas had clear rules of engagement. Life absurdly made sense. Humanity had done what the council never could, made the law understandable. Even worse, enforceable. But the humans weren't done. They inserted footnotes everywhere, like landmines disguised as clarifications. Every clause had a caveat. Every regulation had an exception. The galaxy trembled under a constitution that looked simple until you flipped to the bottom of the page and discovered 3 pages of annotations, half of which boiled down to unless humans say otherwise. And here's the kicker. The galaxy accepted it, because deep down, they knew the truth. Humanity hadn't destroyed the law. They had saved it by weaponizing their greatest cultural export, bureaucracy. The galaxy was more stable under human footnotes than it had ever been under millennia of pompous chanting. By the time the council officially dissolved, replaced by the Unified Legal Assembly, Earth Division, every alien leader had a human interpreter at their side. Courts no longer bothered with choirs. They had stenographers. Treaties were no longer sung. They were emailed as PDFs. The galaxy had gone from ceremonial nonsense to brutal, sarcastic efficiency. And humanity? Humanity leaned back in its swivel chair, sipped its coffee, and muttered the phrase that had become legend. Guess we're lawyers of the galaxy now. You're welcome. It wasn't fleets or weapons that crowned humanity rulers of interstellar order. It wasn't genius technology or divine destiny. It was a footnote, a single line no one thought worth reading. The galaxy never forgot the lesson. If you want peace, if you want order, if you want stability, you don't need armies. You need a human with a red pen.